Scene I, a quiet class, hidden bias. The classroom hummed with the low murmur of pencils scratching paper and the faint buzz of fluorescent lights overhead. A late morning sun slanted through dusty windows, casting fractured rectangles across rows of neatly lined desks. Posters about perseverance and multiplication tables clung to fading walls like afterthoughts. At the front of the room stood Ms. Whitaker, tall, composed, and commanding. Her white blouse was crisply ironed, every button fastened to perfection. She moved with practiced ease, her heels ticking softly against the tile floor. Her voice carried bright and confident when she addressed the students in the first 2 rows. "Excellent, Jason," she said, tapping her red pen approvingly against a worksheet. "You always go the extra mile." Jason, a blond boy with freckles and a loud laugh, beamed. The class chuckled with him. Ms. Whitaker's smile was warm for some. In the back corner, pressed into the edge of the classroom like furniture no one remembered ordering, sat Maya. She was small for her 13 years, with deep brown skin and hair pulled back into 2 tight braids. Her sweatshirt was faded, the hem chewed by time. A thread hung loose from her sleeve, she twisted it around her finger again and again. Her notebook lay open, mostly empty, except for tiny, perfect writing in the corners, thoughts scribbled in silence. Ms. Whitaker didn't look her way. She rarely did. When Maya raised her hand, it was invisible. When she answered, she was too soft to hear. When she didn't, she was disengaged. Today, like every day, she kept her head low, eyes fixed on her paper. It was safer that way. Behind her, a pair of students snickered. One of them leaned forward and whispered loud enough for Maya to hear. "She probably don't even know what class we're in." Laughter, stifled but sharp, cut through the air. Maya flinched but didn't turn around. The paper beneath her blurred for a second. She blinked hard. Ms. Whitaker glanced toward the back of the room, then just as quickly looked away. "Maya," she called, voice cool and clipped. A pause. Maya's heart pounded against her ribs. Slowly, she looked up. "What's the answer to number 5? She glanced at the board. Her mind was clear, but her throat locked. She began. Ms. Whitaker folded her arms. "It's a simple equation. We've gone over it 3 times. Maya hesitated. "Well," the teacher pressed. A few students were already smirking. One of them mock whispered, "Any day now." Maya finally spoke. "Is it 24? Her voice was barely above a whisper. Ms. Whitaker exhaled sharply through her nose. "You guessing or answering?" Heat rose to Maya's cheeks. She opened her mouth, then closed it again. "I'll take that as a guess. Moving on, Emily?" As the white girl 2 rows ahead answered confidently, Ms. Whitaker nodded in approval and smiled again, warm and proud. The warmth never reached the back of the classroom. Maya stared at the numbers on her paper. Her jaw clenched. It wasn't that she didn't know. She did know. She always knew. She just couldn't find her voice under the weight of being watched only when expected to fail. Outside the window, a bird fluttered past, a quick shadow, there and gone. In Maya's notebook, her pencil moved silently. 1 sentence. Then another. Her handwriting flawless. Equations solved. Notes written in her own code. Her sanctuary. From the hallway, the heavy thunk of footsteps echoed, approaching. Slower, deliberate. A clipboard under one arm. A brief murmur at the door. Ms. Whitaker turned her head mid-sentence. "Yes." The classroom quieted as the door creaked open. Standing in the frame was Principal Harris, his dark gray suit sharp against the pale light behind him. His expression was unreadable, but the folder in his hand bore the district seal and inside the results that would change everything. He stepped inside. And Maya finally looked up. Scene 2, humiliation, bias on display. The silence that followed Principal Harris's departure was brief. Just as the heavy classroom door clicked shut behind him, Ms. Whitaker turned back to her students with an almost audible shift in demeanor. It was as though the flicker of tension had never existed. "All right," she said briskly, flipping back to the whiteboard with her marker poised. "Back to real work. We're reviewing quadratic expressions. No distractions, please." Her tone had hardened. Not from anger, but from control, like reins being pulled tight. She scrawled a problem onto the board. X superscript 2 plus 5x plus 6 is equal to 0. The equation sat there like a challenge, bold and unblinking. She turned to face the room, scanning with narrowed eyes until they landed, inevitably, on the last desk in the corner. "You," she said sharply. Maya looked up. The room seemed to still. "Let's see if you actually have something to contribute for once." A ripple passed through the class. Jason smirked. Someone to Maya's right stifled a laugh. Even the fluorescent lights seemed louder for a moment, buzzing overhead like judgment. Maya sat up straighter without realizing it. Her hands were cold. A shallow breath caught in her throat as her mind immediately broke the equation apart. She knew the factors. She knew the answer. But the eyes, so many eyes, burned against her skin. She hated this. Still, she opened her mouth. The solution is x equals -2 and -3, she said slowly, carefully. Her voice trembled, but the logic in her words held firm. A beat of silence followed. Then, Ms. Whitaker tilted her head, feigning confusion. Maybe next time speak only if you're sure, she snapped. This is not a guessing game. The blow landed with precision. A few students laughed. Not loud, but sharp. Quick enough to sting. A boy mimed a buzzer noise. Maya's shoulders curled inward. But she started. No buts, Ms. Whitaker interrupted. Let's not waste everyone's time. Emily, help her out. Emily launched into the solution identical to Maya's with flawless certainty and practiced confidence. Perfect, Ms. Whitaker said, offering Emily a warm nod. Clear and confident. That's what I expect. Maya stared at her desk. The math was right. She had been right. But it didn't matter. Not here. Not from her. The board blurred in her vision. Something behind her ribs ached, not like pain, but pressure. A pressure she had carried since her first day in this room, since the moment she realized she would always have to prove herself twice as much for half the credit. She heard someone whisper, told you she'd mess it up, and felt the burn behind her eyes. But she wouldn't give them the satisfaction. Not her voice. Not her tears. Instead, she blinked once. Deeply. Slowly. The camera, if there had been one, would have caught her eyes in close-up, large, steady, dark and gleaming, not from weakness, but from a growing, dangerous calm. Behind them, a storm held in silence. Not anger. Not defiance. Just knowing. And then a distant, muffled sound, shoes in the hallway. A voice. The doorknob rattled. Ms. Whitaker turned, confused. Another interruption? Maya didn't move. She already knew. Something was coming. Scene 3, the sudden shift. A hushed shuffle of shoes in the hallway. The metallic twist of a doorknob. The classroom, caught mid-exhale, turned its collective head. The door creaked open, and in stepped Principal Harris. He didn't speak right away. He didn't need to. His presence did the talking. A tall man with deep brown skin, salt at his temples, and a calm intensity behind rimmed glasses, he carried authority without having to raise his voice. His tailored charcoal suit contrasted sharply with the faded colors of the classroom, as if a man from another world had just walked onto a forgotten stage. In his hand was a manila folder, thick, official, sealed with the district's blue emblem. Every student in the room knew instinctively this wasn't about lunch menus or routine announcements. This meant something. Ms. Whitaker straightened, immediately tense. She tucked a loose strand of hair behind her ear and tried to mask the flicker of nervous curiosity on her face. Mr. Harris, she said with forced brightness, we weren't expecting you this morning. Principal Harris gave a polite nod, then scanned the room. His gaze moved evenly, slowly. Measuring. Assessing. And then he spoke. Apologies for the interruption. I won't take long. His voice was even deliberate, like someone preparing to deliver news that could not be undone. The results from the National Cognitive Assessment, administered 2 weeks ago, just arrived, he said, holding up the folder. These were standardized IQ evaluations across the district. Confidential until today. Students shifted in their seats. A ripple of murmurs began. Ms. Whitaker opened her mouth to respond, but Harris raised a hand. Calmly but firmly, and continued. There is one result, he said, tapping the folder with his index finger. That stands out. Significantly. Silence returned. The highest score we've seen, not just in this class. Not just in this school. He paused. In the entire district. A few students gasped quietly. Someone whispered, Jason. Another voice chimed in, It's probably Emily. Maya didn't move. She sat perfectly still. Not slouched, not tense, just quiet. Still. A flicker of something behind her eyes. Not surprise. Not excitement. More like a memory remembered. Ms. Whitaker let out a short, breathy laugh. Oh, she said. Well, that's impressive. Who was it? Harris turned his gaze directly to her. His tone remained even, but the shift in the air was unmistakable. I'd like to announce it to the class, if that's all right. Ms. Whitaker gestured awkwardly. Of course. Please. Principal Harris opened the folder. The thick paper inside rustled. A sound louder than it should have been in the charged silence. His eyes moved across the sheet. He took one step forward. Before I say the name, he said, I want to remind all of you. Intelligence doesn't always speak the loudest. It doesn't always sit in the front row. And it certainly doesn't always look like what you expect. Ms. Whitaker froze, her smile faltering. A pulse of energy ran through the room. Unseen but felt. Like pressure before a storm breaks. Harris looked down once more at the document, then back up at the students. His gaze landed on a figure near the back. Small, quiet, still. Maya Thomas. The room recoiled. Not loudly, but unmistakably. Maya did not look around. She didn't need to. She could feel the collective shift. The way heads turned. The way eyes widened in disbelief. The way assumptions shattered like glass underfoot. Jason's pen slipped from his hand and clattered to the floor. Emily blinked as if the air had just left the room. Even Ms. Whitaker swayed slightly, her lips parting in stunned silence. Principal Harris continued, his voice unwavering. 160 verified. Genius-level cognition. Analytical, verbal, spatial reasoning off the charts. He closed the folder. "Let that sink in," he said, scanning the faces of the students. "Because from where I stand, someone in this room just made history." He turned to Maya. Not a dramatic gesture, not performative, just a simple acknowledgement. A contact, respect. And for the first time since the school year began, Maya lifted her head with no fear, no hesitation. Her eyes met his. No smile, no tears, just calm, just truth. The weight she had carried for months, the burden of invisibility, was shifting. But the moment wasn't over. Ms. Whitaker opened her mouth, just barely, as if to protest, to question, to explain away what couldn't be undone. Before she could speak, Harris raised a single hand. And then, some of us need to rethink who we believe deserves a voice. Scene 4, Revelation, the Triumph of the Mind. Time didn't stop, but it staggered. After Principal Harris spoke Maya's name, a silence swallowed the room whole. Not an ordinary pause, but the heavy, breath-held kind that stretches too long and says more than words ever could. The classroom seemed suspended, the air dense with disbelief, confusion, and the sharp crackle of shattered expectations. First, no one moved. Then slowly, mechanically, Jason turned to look at Maya. His jaw hung slightly open. Emily, 2 rows ahead, blinked as if the declaration had somehow come in a foreign language. The boy who'd mimicked a game show buzzer earlier now stared down at his desk, the corner of his mouth twitching, unsure whether to laugh, protest, or apologize. And in the center of it all, at the very front of the room, Ms. Whitaker froze. Her eyes widened only a little, but in that tiny widening was an entire unraveling of her authority. "There must be a mistake," she said. Her voice cracked on the word mistake, betraying the calm she tried to summon. "Maya?" She almost didn't finish the name. Principal Harris stood motionless, the closed folder still tucked beneath his arm. His reply was firm, clipped, and unmistakably final. No mistake. His gaze never left the teacher. 160 IQ. Verified across multiple metrics. This is the highest result the school has ever recorded. Ever. The words didn't echo, but they hung there like a sentence just passed in a courtroom. A judgment. A correction. Ms. Whitaker's face, once confident and composed, drained of certainty. The lines around her mouth deepened, but no further sound escaped her lips. In the back of the room, Maya sat with her hands folded quietly in her lap. Her posture hadn't changed, but inside a slow shift had begun, a thaw. Not of arrogance, not even relief, just truth finally standing in the light. She didn't smile. She didn't flinch. She waited. She waited as her classmates turned toward her, not with the usual dismissal or mockery, but with something they had never offered before, awe and a kind of shame. She could feel it, the crackle of realization as it crept across the room. The awareness that everything they thought they knew about her was built on faulty assumptions, unspoken bias, and silent cruelty. And still, she said nothing. Let them sit with it. Principal Harris took a step forward, not toward Maya, not toward the class, but toward Ms. Whitaker. "I understand," he said quietly, "that giftedness sometimes hides behind silence. That not all brilliance performs. That not every genius raises their hand." She didn't respond. Couldn't. Harris continued, gentler now, but no less direct. "And I also understand that our biases, spoken or not, can keep us from seeing what's right in front of us." Ms. Whitaker swallowed. Her hands trembled slightly, but she locked them behind her back. In that moment, the class wasn't just witnessing Maya's triumph, they were witnessing a fall. Not a public humiliation. Something quieter. More painful. A reckoning. And Maya? She sat in her chair, eyes forward. Her chest steady. Her mind alert. A part of her wanted to say something to the teacher, to the students, to everyone who had made her feel small. But a deeper voice, quieter and wiser, whispered, "Not yet." Principal Harris gave a final nod to Maya this time. A simple gesture of recognition. Then he turned to leave. He paused at the doorway. "One last thing," he said, his voice low yet impossible not to hear. This young woman didn't ask to be seen. She earned it. The door closed behind him with a soft, certain click. And the room remained frozen, every student, every breath, until Ms. Whitaker turned slowly back to the class. Her eyes met Maya's for a split second. And in that flash of silence, everything had changed. Scene V, final bell, respect and reckoning. The door clicked shut behind Principal Harris, and still, no one moved. A hush heavier than silence settled over the classroom, thick like fog, pressing against every wall. The students sat stiff in their chairs, eyes darting, unsure of where to look, what expression to wear, or what this moment demanded of them. The board still held the quadratic equation, long forgotten. The dust in the sunlight drifted lazily across the room. And in the far back corner, Maya slowly lifted her head. Not defiant, not triumphant, but calm, like someone who had finally stepped into a space that had always been hers but had been held behind a locked door. Her chin was steady. Her gaze, quiet and unshaken, moved across the room, not with arrogance, but with the full weight of someone who had seen everything and said nothing for too long. And now no one dared look away. Across the room, Jason lowered his eyes, the earlier smirk wiped clean from his face. Emily clutched her pencil tighter as if something brittle inside her had cracked. The same kids who had whispered behind Maya's back now sat with red ears and clenched throats, wishing they could shrink under their desks or disappear. And at the front of the class, Ms. Whitaker stood motionless. Her fingers gripped the edge of her desk, knuckles pale. She wasn't blinking. Her mouth opened, slightly, then closed again. She looked at Maya, but only for a second. Just long enough to feel the full weight of the gaze return to her. Not with spite, not even with sadness, just truth. She lowered her eyes. Principal Harris's words echoed through the room like the final chime of a bell no one had heard before. You never really saw her, but she saw all of you. The sentence hung in the air, reverberating beneath the skin of every student, beneath every assumption, every overlooked moment, every sidelong glance that had fed a culture of quiet cruelty. And Maya? She let the silence breathe. Her mind, so often forced to hide behind folded arms and quiet nods, was no longer in hiding. She had no need to speak. The numbers had already spoken for her. The truth had already walked into the room, announced itself, and left them changed. Slowly, she closed her notebook, the worn corners folding like wings. As she rose from her seat, the legs of her chair scraped against the tile, sharp, sudden, and unmistakably real. It was the only sound in the room. She walked forward, not fast, not theatrical, just steady, certain. Every head followed her. Every eye tried to make sense of what they'd ignored. She passed Jason, past Emily, past the boy who once whispered about her. And finally, she reached the front of the classroom. Ms. Whitaker stepped slightly to the side. Not commanded, not told, just moved, as if something deep within her had shifted out of place. Her face was pale, her lips drawn tight. Maya didn't stop. She didn't look back. Her hand brushed the door handle, then paused. She turned, just for a moment, and she said softly, but without hesitation, "Next time, listen the first time." She opened the door. Warm sunlight poured in like an ending, or maybe a beginning, and Maya stepped into it. The door closed behind her with a hush. Inside the classroom, no one spoke. No one dared. For the first time all year, the silence wasn't about fear. It was about recognition. It was about respect. And for Ms. Whitaker, it was about reckoning. Fade to black. Roll credits in silence.